The last presentation of SPLASH-E this year is going to be exploring engagement and self-efficacy in an introductory computer science course presented by Rory Kelly.
Yeah, all right, awesome. So I'm going to be talking about exploring engagement and self-efficacy in an introductory computer science course. I'm Rory, and Meghan is also here in the Discord chat for questions later if they come up. And we're both from the University of British Columbia. Quickly, just to introduce what the project was about, giving a quick overview. We wanted to conduct an exploratory study on the relationship between engagement and self-efficacy in an introductory computer science course. So the course that we're using is for non-CS majors, and many of those students do not continue on in CS, but for those that do, this would be the first course in the software engineering stream that teaches foundational software design principles. Throughout the study, we used the experience sampling method that I'll describe in more detail later, which involved regular interviews targeting engagement and self-efficacy fluctuations throughout the term. We were looking for correlation between interview responses, student disengagement, and losses in self-efficacy. And just really quick to touch on, I am a very recent graduate from the University of British Columbia, and Meghan is the actual professor of the course that the study was held in. However, we kept the data from Meghan until the course had concluded in order to meet ethical concerns in that regard. So we might be wondering how we chose to define engagement and self-efficacy for this study. So engagement encompasses various dimensions, including behaviors such as effort, persistence, and concentration, reactions such as interest, happiness, and anxiety, and psychological aspects such as a student's own investment towards learning. Self-efficacy, on the other hand, refers to students' belief in their ability to succeed in a specific domain. It influences the student's motivation, persistence, and performance. Essentially, what it breaks down to is engagement is that day-to-day granular interaction with the course and how that affects the students mentally and emotionally. And self-efficacy is that overarching belief in their ability to succeed and enjoyment of computer science as a concept. The experience sampling method, for those of you who do not know, involves measuring feelings, thoughts, actions, and/or activities by collecting data in context of a participant's life, utilizing repeated measures to track a participant's experience, often using electronic devices or interviews to prompt responders to give their responses. And these data collection intervals can either be time-based or event-based, and an event in a course such as this might be every time a student finishes a homework or after a tutorial or things like that. So as this was an exploratory study, we wanted to find research gaps that we could address and try to find certain solutions for. So we realized there was very much limited research investigating the development of self-efficacy and engagement in computer science education, both of which are concepts that have been shown to be very important for a student's success in other disciplines. This gap is even larger in relation to the experiences of non-CS majoring students that are taking an introductory computer science course. And additionally, the experience sampling method, we believe, could be used a lot more in the context of computer science education in order to investigate students' experiences. So ultimately, we came to the purpose of our study that we were going to try to identify, which was how do international non-CS majoring students' engagement and self-efficacy fluctuate in an introductory computer science course. We also had a secondary goal of finding what caused those students to disengage from their learning. But as we'll see later, this kind of became secondary due to a slight lack of qualitative data that was able to be collected. To give some more context on the study specifics, we used a course at the University of British Columbia that had 42 international students and was meant to be a first-year course that is introductory and assumes no prior programming knowledge. It was intended for students who do not plan to major in computer science and based on the How to Design Programs curriculum, focusing on a systematic approach to program design. The participants were about a third of the body of the class. They're all international non-computer science majoring students and were those students who consented to join the study from the entire class size. For the data collection, as I mentioned earlier, we use the experience sampling method. For our purposes specifically, we use an event-based sampling that was done after each of the tutorials in the course. This involved 2 to 5 minute interviews of in-person data collection conducted by myself. Each week, I would ask consistent questions so that we could then kind of compare the responses as time went on and see how the responses from the students fluctuated throughout the course. And these questions were really designed to focus in on the students' engagement and self-efficacy as the course went on. Here's the interview schedule. So the course was a shortened 8-week summer term course. So there's only 8 weeks of instruction, and it followed the designing programs curriculum. So we started with Python and functions and moved into some different data types, list data types, and more advanced function analysis programs, visualization, and the projects that the students would conduct. And for those middle 6 weeks is when I conducted interviews. So the interviews were largely kind of retrospective for what had happened so far in the course, as well as honed in more specifically on how the student felt since the last interview as well. So a lot of the times the interviews would have a lot of content, mostly from the week of instruction that had just happened. So it kind of syncs up with the topic being discussed. For the interview questions, we used inspiration from previous studies on effective self-efficacy questions for measuring that aspect of a student's experience, as well as a study on how to design an engagement questionnaire. And we opted to go with 3 self-efficacy questions and 5 engagement questions. The self-efficacy questions were statements whether the student agreed with the following. I feel capable of doing well in the course. I feel interested in the course materials, and I feel proud of my accomplishments thus far. The engagement questions were, have you been enjoying class? Has the course been moving at a reasonable pace? Have the course topics been interesting to you? Has the course been too challenging? And if so, what has been the most difficult part? And do you feel that you have learned new skills? For the data analysis, obviously, it's a lot of qualitative data, so we're able to dive into what students found to be the most difficult and what they did and did not enjoy. But we also wanted to have some quantitative analysis, so we decided to kind of classify student responses on a binary scale or 3 scale of 0 for no responses and 1 for yes responses, with a 0.5 for kind of things that obviously lay in the middle. And since students were from an international background, maybe didn't have English as a first language, we found that the responses were often shorter and simpler, so they lent themselves very easily to this either yes, no, or somewhere maybe in the middle scale. Just for an example here of some interview responses that and how they might have been classified. If a student kind of answers straight up that they're not interested, as in the first example here, then that is an obvious 0 answer or a no answer for us. And if the student simply said that they enjoyed the content that week, then that's an obvious yes answer to whether they had enjoyed the content. Now diving into our results, we can see some plots here. These are the first 4 plots. There are 4 more plots kind of categorizing all 8 of those questions that I mentioned earlier. We can see that there's a naming convention started here that is like SE1 for self-efficacy 1. And then it goes on SE2, SE3, and then we'll have engagement 1 for the first engagement question, and then there's 4 more engagement questions on the following slide here. As you can see, there's a general trend upwards for both self-efficacy and engagement as the course goes on, but there are some interesting spikes that we can observe visually, such as in interview week 3 and 5, we can see that there might be larger engagement or self-efficacy in some of these plots, and 4 and 6 see a slight decline in engagement and self-efficacy. This trend continues on the following slide here with some similar actions. Important to note that engagement question 4 is framed kind of the opposite, so it's whether the course had been too challenging, so a larger response involves less engagement, which is why there is a peak at interview 4 instead of a lower point, as in the other graphs. But a lot of this kind of follows a similar trend, but might be kind of hard to notice visually. So we decided to also include the Spearman's correlation between the different questions to have a more numerical, much more easy to dissect view of how the questions were answered. So here's following the same naming convention as before with the SE1 through 3 and E1 through 5. And I've highlighted the responses that are 0.3 or higher to show some moderate correlation or more. So just diving into a couple of these, for Here's the correlation between SE2 and E1, which were I feel interested in the course materials and have you been enjoying class, which might lead us to believe that feeling interested in the course materials was correlated to the student enjoying class. We also have, for example, feeling capable of success in the course was correlated to the student enjoying class, and feeling proud of their accomplishments in the course was correlated to the student feeling that they had learned new skills. Summarizing all of those kind of results as correlations here, we have that the belief in the ability to do well in the course was correlated to students feeling interested in the course materials. Belief in the ability to do well in the course was correlated to students enjoying class. Feeling interested in the course materials were correlated to students enjoying class. Feeling proud of their accomplishments was correlated to students feeling that they had learned new skills. Enjoying class was correlated to students finding the course topics interesting. And enjoying class was correlated to students finding that they had learned new skills. Now to discuss those results, we found that there were two major key findings that we wanted to focus in on. Students who reported higher levels of engagement with the course material often had a matching boost in their beliefs of self-efficacy. So we found that positive experiences throughout the semester, such as enjoying class and finding course topics interesting, were also correlated with a stronger sense of some aspects of self-efficacy. And this is important because self-efficacy has been shown in previous research to have a potential link to student success in the course. And it's kind of a difficult concept for instructors to really lock down and how to focus in on and promote, because it's this overarching feeling of the students. But if there is this correlation between self-efficacy and engagement, then it just goes to show that we can focus in on that day-to-day engagement in order to also promote that overarching self-efficacy and potentially that success of the student in the course. So all of that goes to show that targeting disengagement is equally as important in potentially as targeting losses in self-efficacy if they're correlated. So we also found that students reported disengagement when encountering challenging concepts that lacked clear structure and reinforcement. So the course topics that students found to be the most difficult were involving subjects that they likely had never seen before, such as designing and using data types, which is something that doesn't really come up outside of computer science for a lot of these younger students. As well as key findings, we also wanted to highlight some key contributions that this study can help kind of give to the research community. Overall, it can give an explanation of how to include the experience sampling method in computer science education context and a methodology for future research. It can go to help people develop engagement and self-efficacy questionnaires in this context as well. It can be a starting point for further research on the relationship between engagement and self-efficacy in this context. And it also can inform decisions in curriculum design around promoting student engagement. There are some limitations and recommendations, as with all research, that we can provide. So we had a relatively small sample size of undergraduate students who answered the interviews, and they can also had a constrained number of interviews per student, which can definitely limit our data collection and the amount of data that we had. Participants were all international students, so potentially expanding this beyond just international students could help generalize the results. Some interview responses were definitely brief, which limited the depth of the data analysis. And the data that was collected was done so during a faster paced summer term, as I mentioned. So that summer term might have been more intense and difficult. So it might be more generalizable if someone can conduct the data or the research study in a regular term. So these are just the references I used throughout the slides, and there's more references in the actual paper itself. But thanks for these different references that helped guide our study. And thank you all for listening. I've included a small recap on the screen for when there's questions here, so people can kind of remember some of the key points. And that is it for me.